to Women in Law UK Lunch and Learn webinar, the first of this week. We're in week 6 or 7 of lockdown, I can't remember. We're all trying to homeschool if you are, and also do lots of other stuff as well, including this. My name is Sally Penny. I'm a barrister. I set up Women in the Law UK, and I run it along with my PA and some very clever people. So, our clever ambassadors. So some of you have been on these Lunch and Learn webinars before, which is great. We've got a fantastic speaker for you today on imposter syndrome, who's great. So I'm delighted Vanessa can join us. She's going to introduce herself and then crack on with the topic.
Okay, so I'm calling it Imposter Syndrome, Real or Imaginary, because I'm going to endeavour to help you see if you suffer from imposter syndrome, that it is actually in your imagination. So thank you so much for all coming. I'm really excited to have you all here. And I think I've got good news for you today. And I'm hoping by the end of the session, if you do have imposter syndrome, that your shift would have already started happening. So let's move straight on. Of course, I know we're living through very extraordinary and weird times, and nobody knows from one day to the next what's happening. So what I've noticed myself as an empath and a sensitive is that whatever emotions we normally have, they're probably even stronger now. So it's very, very important to recognize that and realize that we need to have tools to be able to manage that. Still people coming in.
I'll lock them out in a minute.
So what you're going to learn today obviously is going to help you with imposter syndrome, but also it will help you with other challenges that you might have going on, most of which are actually caused by our own mind. So just bear that in mind. This is not limited to imposter syndrome. So the aim is to expose imposter syndrome for what it really is, which is an imposter. And you want to probably know a little bit about me. So I'm Vanessa Ugatti, the True Worth expert, and I help professional people like lawyers and others be able to generate more revenue ethically without having to get more clients or do more work, and crucially feel good about themselves. So you might be thinking, well, what's that got to do with imposter syndrome? And I'd say everything, because at the core of my work is self-worth. And self-worth is actually at the heart of everything that we do. It drives our behavior. So if we have a lower self-worth, which has got nothing to do with your intellectual ability whatsoever, I make sure I get that one in. But if you have a lower sense of self-worth than would be good for you, then that's going to impact on you. And I think low self-worth and imposter syndrome are very connected with each other. So, of course, I've also suffered from imposter syndrome, because you don't talk about something like this unless you have. And anybody who's out there talking about imposter syndrome who claims never to have had it, I don't believe it. Or if they say that, they're not very genuine, because you need to understand internally what something is in order to be able to help people shift from it. So because I've suffered from it myself, I don't want other people to suffer, because it's unnecessary suffering, in fact. So I want them to feel good about themselves. So let's dive right in. So what is this thing called imposter syndrome? There was one lady, I think, was it Caroline, who said she'd only just recently heard the term, or was it somebody else? I can't remember. Somebody said it.
It's a mature student.
Oh, a mature student. So as soon as you put a label on something, you actually create a limitation and you put yourself in a kind of box. And I don't think that's a good thing for us to do, but we're doing that. From the moment we were born, people put labels on us, even male, female labels, even our nationality or our race, or we're being labeled all the time. So labels are limitations in my book, and it's good to be able to recognize that and think that there must be another way of doing things. So imposter syndrome is just another label, but I want to actually read out the definition that Wikipedia gives of imposter syndrome, because I think it's quite interesting. So imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern, and notice the word pattern, doesn't say an illness, in which an individual doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this phenomenon remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve all they have achieved. Individuals with, I'm going to call it IS from now on, so I don't have to say imposter syndrome every 5 seconds, incorrectly attribute their success to luck or interpret it as a result of deceiving others into thinking they are more intelligent than they perceive themselves to be. And notice that word perceive as well, because how you perceive yourself is how you think about yourself. And that sometimes is what causes the challenge. So while early research focused on the prevalence among high achieving women, IS has been recognized to affect both men and women equally. And I can confirm that is true, because again, often women think that they lack confidence more than men do, but there are plenty of men who also lack confidence. So I think that's not actually as menacing as the term imposter syndrome actually sounds. I think the label makes it sound worse than the reality of what it is. But the syndrome can actually create a permanent state of can't cope mindset, which strips professional life of enjoyment and also can contaminate private life and relationships away from work. So if you can recognize this in yourself, or if you recognize this in yourself, please from now on see that this is a label. And if you had a product, and it could be a jar of strawberry jam, say, I don't know why that came to mind. If you just take that label off, then you don't know what's inside. You can't judge it anymore. You've got to then taste it to see that it's strawberry jam. So you can get rid of this label whenever you want to, whenever you like. And I'm going to give you some ideas of how to do that. So who suffers from imposter syndrome? Tons of people. Tons of people. It's much more common than I would have ever really realized. It's only in the last 2 or 3 years that I've realized, or known from other people I've spoken to, how commonplace it is. But the key is high achieving men and women who lack confidence, even though the evidence, as I've already said, of their achievements is palpable. And in my work with lawyers and other professionals who struggle to charge their worth, I've noticed that they also often have imposter syndrome. That's why I say I know it's extremely connected. But the funny thing is that even though they have imposter syndrome, they are so competent, they are way above average. So if you have imposter syndrome, you're way more intelligent than most people out there. And that's such an irony if you think about it, because anybody who doesn't have much of a brain was never going to suffer from it. So the fact that you're intelligent is part of the challenge that you have that makes you think you might have this imposter syndrome. Does that make any sense to anybody? Also, the other thing that I've noticed with people is that they have very similar characteristics. And these are characteristics that I've seen in other people that have imposter syndrome and also don't charge effectively, and have been very similar characteristics to mine. And the first one is, and they're none of them bad, the first one is extreme conscientiousness. So often people are conscientious, people who are conscientious are more prone to having this because they have such high expectations of themselves, and their expectations of themselves are often way higher than lots of other people. And again, in the people I've worked with, this one is always happening. I'm always seeing it. But because their perception is, this is how everybody else is, so they see everything up here, but actually a lot of people are much further down. Until they realize that or understand that, they can give themselves a really hard time. And linked with that is perfectionism. So perfectionism is probably a whole webinar in itself, but lots of people do have that one going on. Self-criticism, again, they're all very linked. I was a super self-critic myself, I think, because I had been quite criticised growing up, and that's how in those days people did things, or families did things, or parents did things. And it wasn't to be nasty, it was because they wanted to make sure that their children were brought up properly. But actually, self-criticism isn't a great thing. The last two characteristics are people-pleasing and sensitivity. So if you've got any of those going on, then stick them in the chat box if you dare, if you're brave. But there's also other reasons why people have imposter syndrome, and it might just be false beliefs that they've picked up about themselves along the way through their childhood and are still attached to. So that's really important for you to understand, that you are a bunch of things: your thoughts, your beliefs, what you've gained through your conditioning, whether it's society, whether it's your own family, whether it's your culture. All those things will have helped create what you think is you, but quite a bit of it isn't actually true. But somehow or another, we've caught up into these things and we've believed it all, and then we've made ourselves that. So I have to just bring the slides down a bit. How to immobilize it. So there's lots of things that we can do to become more aware of this and start overcoming this imposter syndrome. But it does mean that you have to understand your own mind and how your mind works. Because if you don't do that, it's quite difficult to do it. Because nothing, of course, can change without your say-so. Only you can decide if you want to change. Nobody else can make you do that. So really, imposter syndrome is no more than a set of beliefs that you've acquired, and then you therefore have the power to change that. So part of my job when I'm working with clients isn't just about helping them charge properly, it's about changing the way they're thinking about themselves and these false beliefs that they have by looking at things from a different perspective. And of course, that makes them feel different about themselves. And then it means they can take different actions. So it's empowering people. So in order to do that, we need to understand our mind and how it works. And so we have two things. We've got a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. And you can see from the image that the conscious mind is above the water and the subconscious mind is below the water. And you can also see from this image that the subconscious mind is quite significantly bigger than the conscious mind. So I'm going to explain about the two. So the conscious mind is like the captain of the ship, and its job is actually to steer the vessel. And I like to call it Captain Conscious because it makes me chuckle, and I think it makes people remember it. And it only holds a few bits of information at any one time. Its processing power is quite small by comparison with the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is like the crew of the ship. And so I call it subservient subconscious, but it's a bit of a mouthful. So just think of it as the crew or the child. Now, this subconscious mind is amazing because it holds millions and millions of bits of information. Everything you've ever seen, heard, touched, tasted, smelt, experienced, everything from the day you arrived on this planet. So it doesn't take a great genius to realize that you've got a huge giant computer with lots of stuff sloshing around inside, some of which is positive, some of which is negative, and some of which is neutral. And that's quite a challenge. Now, this subconscious mind, its job, did I say what the captain's job was? I can't remember now. So I'm going to go back to the conscious mind just in case I didn't say it. The captain consciousness job is to steer the vessel. The subconscious mind, or the crew's job, is to follow the instructions that the captain gives it to the letter. And that is actually all the subconscious mind can do. It does not have the power. If you say to it, oh, you know, I'm rubbish at public speaking, the subconscious mind can't say back to you, oh, that's not true, you're really good at it. It just says, okay, rubbish at public speaking, accepted. It's like, yeah, it's just like a computer. Whatever you program into it, it believes, and it cannot do anything other than that. So that's really important to recognize that. Now, amazingly, if you didn't know this, we have between 50 to 80,000 thoughts a day. That's a hell of a lot of thoughts, isn't it? And it's a bit of a sobering thought to know that. But the majority of those thoughts are actually old thoughts that we've had many times before. So that means that imposter syndrome thoughts probably go back quite a long time and have just been repeated over and over again, like a broken down record. And I'm going to have a sip of water because I've got a bit of a dodgy throat today, not COVID though. So what actually happens is a situation will occur that's probably you will deem as being negative. A thought will come up from the subconscious mind into the conscious mind. It's probably a memory of something that's happened in the past. The conscious mind just accepts that thought and believes it. And so it then gets reinforced and it remains in the subconscious mind. So what that actually means is, if you accept a negative thought that's coming up from your subconscious mind and you act upon it, you're listening to the child. You're allowing the child to steer the vessel, not the captain. And if you were on a real boat and suddenly an incompetent, or suddenly a child was trying to steer the vessel, you'd be a little bit worried, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? Somebody nod their head, yeah. Wouldn't you? Yeah. Or even say yes, absolutely. So this is what we're up against. So I mentioned public speaking. I was going to tell a story about public speaking. So say, for example, a child is in school and the teacher asks them to stand up and read a poem, and perhaps this child is 7 or 8 years old and they're a bit nervous about standing up in class and reading a poem, and they read this poem out, and in the middle of it they stutter or stumble. Now, children being what they're being, I'm not always that nice, make some negative comments. And perhaps the teacher's not very good and says something quite negative as well. So that child, who's a sensitive child, lands up not feeling very comfortable about standing up in school and reading a poem. And that memory gets lodged in the unconscious mind as public speaking isn't good, or it's not, you know, I feel scared when I'm doing it. So fast forward 20 years or so, this person's in quite a good job because, of course, they're an intelligent person. Probably by now they've also got imposter syndrome, but hey, you know, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And their boss says, in a couple of weeks' time, I'd like you to do a presentation to our very important client, so-and-so. This memory then comes up in this poor person's mind, and their immediate thought is, oh, I'm no good at public speaking. They have no idea whether they are, because they're 27 years old now. They're not 7 anymore. But the memory is of a 7-year-old coming up in the conscious mind, and they just accept that they're no good at public speaking. So they give themselves a much harder time. So you might be thinking now, oh, gosh, okay, that's good to know, but what on earth am I going to do about it? Because that's not really going to work if I just keep following those thoughts and act upon them. Fear not, because I have a little model here to help you navigate this. You're keeping the nautical theme going on, even though I'm not a sailor and I don't actually like sailing, but there you are, never mind. This is my 5-step model, and I'm actually, at the end of the webinar, there's a link that you can click and go on and download a copy of this. And it's specially for women in the law, people who've attended this event. So 5-step model, the first step is listen in. Now, what you'll have to do is actually listen into your thoughts, because most of the time we're not really aware. They're just droning on in the background. We're not really paying attention to them that much. We're just following them, but not really consciously following them. So you need to listen in to see what those thoughts are doing. And if you check in and the thought doesn't feel great, you know, it's a negative thought, could be, oh, blimey, you know, I really didn't feel like getting out of bed this morning. It's good to do it first thing in the morning. Oh, the weather's good, but, you know, oh, I've got all these things to do today, and what's going on, and I don't want to be stuck indoors. You know, there could be this negative diatribe going on. I'm not saying you have got it, but you could have it. You want to nip that in the bud, because that's not making you feel good. It's no good for you. So you can immediately, when you notice something like that, interrupt it. And I say, press the delete button, imaginary delete button, and press it, and then actually choose something else to focus on. And you don't have to be choosing something massive. You could be looking out in your garden and seeing a beautiful flower. I sat out the other day for a few minutes in between doing things, just to get a bit of sun. And I noticed we have these beautiful flowers. I live in a block of flats. We have these beautiful flowers, really beautiful pink. And I looked at this flower and I thought, wow, you are so beautiful. And I thought, how long have you been there that I haven't noticed you before now? So just in that moment of shifting onto that flower, any worries or problems have immediately disappeared. And we have that power in every single instance. So anytime you become aware of it, you can shift it. And that's a good thing, because you're strengthening your conscious mind, your captain, then even doing something as simple as that, what I've just explained there. So step 3 is checking in. That's an alternative to the thoughts, because as I mentioned, because we have 50 to 80,000 thoughts a day, you can't possibly monitor that many thoughts. It would be impossible, and you'd go crazy anyway trying to do it. So another way of doing it is just checking in 2 or 3 times a day to see how you're feeling, because your thoughts tend to create your feelings. And if you're not feeling good, again, you can move yourself away from that feeling, or if you want to explore it, you can explore it. But if it's just a minor one, you can just move away and say, okay, what makes me feel good? And for me, it might be looking out or going out into the sunshine and getting that vitamin D. It might be something quite small, just to, again, shift that focus away from anything negative. Now, I know at the moment, things are very challenging for all of us, and we can get more stress than normal. So step 4 is a really great mantra that was shared with me many years ago, which will absolutely bring you back into a state of calm. Because when you're stressed, your thoughts are racing and you really have lost control. Because we think stress comes from outside, but actually it comes from inside. And when we actually recognize something comes from inside, we then retake back our power. Because if you blame something on the outside, on external circumstances, you are absolutely giving your power away. So this mantra is, as these thoughts, you might want to write this down, as these thoughts enter my mind, so I will let them go. I'll say it again. As these thoughts enter my mind, so I will let them go. As these thoughts enter my mind, so I will let them go. And that gives the mind a focus away from the racing mind. And it also demonstrates that thoughts are very transient. We don't actually have to hold on to them. We can let them go. So you repeat the statement as many times as you need to, preferably out loud if you're on your own, and if not, you can do it in your head, until you can feel yourself calming down. So if you are somebody who gets stressed easily, have it written down on a sticky note, so you have it close by to you, so you don't have to think, it's just there and you can grab it. It's really worth investing a bit of time in doing that. And step 5, as you can see for yourself, is practice, practice, practice. Because everything that we've ever learned is done through repetition, and you can't just know it intellectually and then it just happen. You have to put things into practice. So they're simple, but they're not easy because you have to be mindful. So let's move on to the next one, which is what I call home play. And it's just taking this model. You can ask yourself questions. Question 1, what are your first thoughts when you wake up in the morning? Question 2, what one negative thought which you've frequently had for a very long time that you would like to delete and replace with a positive one? When would be the best times of day for you to check in? So it's relating to the 4 steps, if you like. And then when would you need to do, what would you need to do to remind yourself to do this if you're in a negative state? So these questions relate to the first 4 steps. And I highly recommend that you get the slides and then you try and do this, not try and do this, that you actually do it. Because I'm sure you will reveal things to yourself that perhaps you weren't aware of before. This is not a quick fix. Doing the webinar is not a quick fix. It's giving you some tools to be able to work through yourself. So moving on, I see the time is going at breakneck speed.
Don't worry, we can overrun slightly.
Yes, it's other people's times.
Yeah.
It's whether people have time, isn't it? So it is an important subject, so it is worth investing time in this, because this is time you're giving yourself to be a better version of yourself. So I highly recommend it. Now, there's another technique that you can use, which is making me smile, because I really love it. I can't see the whole slide because of people here. And the first step, and it's called How to Dissociate Yourself. And if you see imposter syndrome as a separate entity from yourself, you're then not identifying with it. So disassociation is actually a neuro-linguistic programming technique. It's not something that I've made up. So when you say, okay, there is me, and then there is imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is just a collection of beliefs and thoughts that you have. And just as you can look at and watch your thoughts, you can see imposter syndrome as separate. And immediately that you separate yourself from it, you've already made a shift. You're not so caught up in it. It's just a label. And by a disassociation, you're loosening its grip on you. So just try it now. I've written something down here. Try it now. Just declare in the chat box, I am separate from imposter syndrome. I am not it, and it is not me. Or you can just put, I am not it, and it is not me, because that's shorter. I'm not it, and it is not me. That is actually the truth, even though there might be part of your brain saying, oh no, I have got this thing. No, it's not you. It's definitely not you. Now the second step is really cool. Give it a name, because you're wanting it to have its own identity separate from you. And I came up with two names, which I have to, Isabel Sparrow or Iram Siddiqui. And I just randomly looked at, that was a Muslim surname, Muslim surnames, and Siddiqui I picked because I like the sound of it. And then I found out that its meaning, I believe, is the truthful, which I thought made me smile, because I thought, wow, that's amazing. So the question is, if you call this Isabel Sparrow, you can't possibly be scared of a sparrow unless you've got a real phobia for birds. Or Iram Siddiqui, you can't be scared of the truth, surely, especially when the truth says imposter syndrome is not you. It's moving you further away from imposter syndrome. It's so simple, and yet it's powerful, because if you play this game, remember your subconscious mind can't say, no, that's not correct. It can only do what you tell it to do. And when you're playing this game, you're playing Captain Conscious, and you're saying, imposter syndrome is separate. This is its name. I am not imposter syndrome. And if you do that on a regular basis, you're just moving yourself away from it. Don't underestimate the power of doing this, because the subconscious mind just has to accept over a period of time what you're saying. So it's important to become mindful of what you're saying to yourself as often as you can, as I've shown you in the 5-step model. Choose positive thoughts as much as you possibly can and reinforce these. And I know sometimes the chuntering monkey mind is coming up saying all sorts of disaster ideas that are going on in the world, but you have to keep bringing it back to now, because otherwise it will want to run ahead with you. So change the record is part of this process. And you can use affirmations for this. And if you don't know what affirmations are, they are just I am statements normally. And they need to be in the present tense, because if you put it in the future actually for the mind never comes. So it's best if they're in the present tense. So I've got one here. I am a confident, successful and highly experienced lawyer, or it could be another profession, who achieves fantastic results for my clients. Now that's probably very truthful, and it's a much better thing to say. What are you showing me, Sally?
Nothing.
Oh, you're not, you're just taking a picture.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a confident, and remember, you're not saying this to anybody else. You are not boasting. You are only saying it to yourself. And if you are brave, go into the mirror and say it in front of the mirror. I am a confident, successful and highly experienced lawyer, barrister, marketer, whatever it is, who achieves coach fantastic results for my clients. That is just as true, far more true than your imposter syndrome beliefs will ever be. So repeat it as much as you can. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. So I have to talk about fear, because whether it's connected with imposter syndrome or whether it's connected with anything else, because as human beings, part of the subconscious mind's job is to hardwire us for fear. And the reason for that is to keep us safe. Because if you think about it, in caveman days, and even though I'm old, I wasn't born in caveman days, but in caveman days, they were having to fight a lot of physical problems. You know, it could be the the woolly mammoth or the saber-toothed tiger. So they had to have a system whereby they were protected, and that system is the fight or flight response. And that fight or flight response gives more energy, so the person can either fight whatever the threat is or run away. Now the challenge is that we don't, apart from COVID-19 now, we don't normally have that many physical threats. But what we do have a lot of is imaginary threats. But because the subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is imagined, we tend to respond, or we do respond in exactly the same way in our bodies as if we were about to be physically attacked. So we, as human beings, will avoid things that make us feel fearful. But what I say is that we have to confront fear, because fear, if we don't confront fear, it will be controlling us, and we don't want fear to control us. Very often, and I've got this analogy here, fear is just an imaginary fear, and I use false evidence appearing real. You can also have face everything and rise. So if you have imposter syndrome, you can recognize that you have this. You can also recognize, you can also hide away from it and not want to deal with it, or you could recognize it and say, actually, I'm going to face up to this thing. Because when you do, you actually diminish its power completely. A lot of fear is imaginary. And so when we face up to it, the fear loses its power. And as it loses its power, our power goes up. That is what happens. So when you're feeling fear, you're feeling your heart beating fast, the shallow breath, that kind of thing. Ask yourself, is this a real fear, or am I just making it up? And even right now, I bet you 99 times out of 100, if not more, you're making it up. It's just a habit. It's a reaction to things that we've had before. And so stop listening to the fear voice, move into the I'm powerful, I'm capable of thinking the thoughts that I choose to think right now, and I choose to think positive thoughts. You won't see me put negative stuff out on LinkedIn ever. Everything I put out is, yes, sometimes it's realistic, recognizing that people are struggling, but not negative stuff. Always with a twist to how can we make this positive? How can we uplift ourselves? How can we help other people uplift? And it doesn't mean to say that I don't have any feelings, because I do, believe me. I have my wobbles. I have my wobbly times, my wobbly days when I don't feel so great. And I have to then pull myself out and use my own stuff and get on with it. And things like this are really helpful, because sharing what I love to share, sharing what I know is the truth and will help people. lifts me as well. So this is what we're up against. We're up against things more than ever but we have more danger coming from the mind than we do from coming out there, even with that virus going on. The mind will cause us more grief than that will. Yes, people are getting sick. Yes, some people are dying. I'm not saying that, I'm not belittling any of that. But being in a negative state will not help any of that at all, and it won't help anybody. So just bear that in mind. So it's one thing to watch a webinar, but of course it's another one to take action. So ask yourself, what actions will you take as a result of today? If this resonated for you, if it doesn't resonate for you, then you're not being forced to. It's entirely up to you. So every time you overcome your mind, you strengthen yourself and claim back your power. I should have put that in the slide because I love that. Every time you overcome your mind, you strengthen yourself and claim back your power. So imposter syndrome definitely does not have to have the last word. And you're only a few steps away from creating a more effective and happier version of yourself, both professionally and personally. So please start by using the 5-step model and keep reminding yourself that you and nobody else and nothing else is in charge. So do I do questions first, or do I do my call to action first with the let's do questions first, shall we?
Well, people might switch off, so if maybe do call to action and then we'll do questions.
Okay, so the call to action is these are my contact details if you want to get in touch, and if you want a copy of that 5-step model to manage your monkey mind, which is explained in greater detail than the slides show, then you can just click on the link and you can grab it for yourself. And if you want to get in touch with me for any reason, if it's to ask a question for whatever reason, just send me an email and I'll be happy to hear from you.
Brilliant. So great. So firstly, let's do our virtual clap for Vanessa, which is brilliant. So if I could just plug and bring us to a close, if you missed our resilience workshop, that was another brilliant one. It's on YouTube. Watch it there. It's really good. And again, it's got tips, which were brilliant. My favorite tip today from Vanessa was when she was talking about the 5-step model. And she said, we have the power, in the words of Snap. Those of you who are 80s kids have got the power to change the mindset. At least during this lunch hour, right? And to the next day. So I hope that everyone goes away a bit more enlightened and we use the tools and we can clap again for Vanessa.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. It's been lovely.
And Friday's social media with Alex McCann. He's a great, great guy. Just telling us the do's and don'ts and actually how to use social media, which I'm not very good at. He managed to train me, so that's capable. I don't do everything. So join us there, which will be brilliant. And a few other things are going on in the background. As I said, you can watch again all the videos, which if you may have missed, with the Lunch and Learn. But our podcasts, or my podcasts, are out. Today is Judge Rinder. Listen to it. It's a really good one, or Robert Rinder, I should call him. He's not a real judge, as we all know. But it's a really inspirational one. And if you're feeling a bit down, honestly, it's really quite a funny one. Listen to that. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you again. Stay in touch if you're new. If you need to break up your day, the reasons they're at this time is that's where the courts are closed. So even if the courts were open, some still are, then those of us working can actually stop. And even if you're not in law, it's forcing you to kind of go, stop homeschooling, let your kids go outside or go on screens, whatever, and have a bit of me time. And on our well-being, 10 steps to well-being, learning something new is good for our well-being. So I hope that people have got something away from this lunchtime. And we look forward to seeing you. And I suppose the final thing is Thursday nights, we have this thing called In Conversation With. I don't know if people have been on there. You basically bring a glass of wine. So I hope people aren't abusing anything if you drink, or a cup of tea. Or water.
Water.
Yeah, and so there, I just ask people how they're getting on during COVID. I'm conscious that some people live alone, some people are not having any kind of contact or connection. And so, yeah, and then we stop and clap for the NHS. And if people want to carry on, they can do. And we have some approved counsellors and therapists. If people want to see them afterwards, for our members, they can, and financial well-being. So that's quite good fun. It is Thursday night, only an hour.